Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to class 115. There will be two more classes after this, and then we'll, as I said, probably pause for a while as I try to finish work on a book on the very subject that we've been dealing with, namely the mind of God and the structure of reality. Um, the interesting thing is I can summarize the whole book in about a page, and which I've done in an outline. But every time I try to write it, it ends up being quite longer than that. So we'll see what happens. If not, we'll get back to doing some interesting stuff here. I particularly want to get back to the tools that we discussed when we first restarted the classes about how to interpret poetry or poetic language, or the figurative language that's a feature of Scripture. We're not going to have a Q&A tonight because the Super Bowl is on, and while I know that as religious people, we don't pay attention to such things. I do. And so I'm going to, when we're over, see if I can see at least the last quarter of the Super Bowl. Um, Let me share my screen, and we will begin. Class 115, the fear of God and the value of guilt. Now, these things may seem to be two disparate topics, and they can be dealt with separately and valuable as separate topics, but they're connected in this discussion, and it'll become apparent why in just a minute. The fear of God is such an strange phrase in a Baha'i context, because we have every reason to trust God and to believe that everything's going to turn out all right. Assurances that the people in other religions may not have. Uh, and so we know however bad things get on a global scale or even on the local scale, that ultimately the planet is destined to create an image of the heavenly world in concrete form. So why should we fear God? And yet the writings say repeatedly that we should fear God. We should have the fear of God. So what can that possibly mean? And the value of guilt will become apparent in the sense that uh, guilt is viewed by so many people as an anathema insofar as religion is concerned. And that is, they feel that we shouldn't feel guilt if religion should rid us of such things or give us an avenue to deal with guilt. And so you have, of course, the confessional, the tripartite part of the penitential process in the Catholic Church. And then you have various other denominations of Christianity and other religions that have a process for getting rid of your guilt or your sense of having committed some violation of a sin as defined within the religion. So the first thing we're going to start with is a favorite phrase of my brother's, and I've used it in this class before, but it's well worth repeating. We talk about we fear God because if we break the laws of God, it is both explicit and implicit that we will somehow pay the price. If not karma in this world, then in the life to come, we may at least have to be cognizant of the people we've hurt and the things we've done wrong, or more importantly, perhaps, or more obviously, the sins of omission, as they're called, where we have not done all that we should or could do to uh, um, impel and compel together the teachings of Baha'u'llah, which is the solution to the remedies of the world as provided by Baha'u'llah as the great physician. And so my brother, I don't know if he came up with this himself, but it is something we both utilized in a lot of our talks and writing. We don't break the laws of God, rather we break ourselves upon the laws. And that may sound obvious, but it bears a little explication, namely that the law is there describing reality. They're not they're not, what should I say? They're not simply the wish of God that we do certain things in order to bring about uh, a felicitous civilization or community. They are laws that describe the best way to get through this life, if you're an individual, or the best way to create an evolving social framework if we're talking about ourselves collectively. And so the laws of, in other words, let's put it this way, if you have an unjust society or an unjust family or an unjust community, it will fall apart, not because of retribution from God, but rather because they describe the laws of justice, describe the best and most efficacious way to steer through the trials and tribulations of this life. So while, and one example that I always used to use when I was giving firesides on this concept was simply nobody knows better than a drug addict the uh, uh, reason that Baha'u'llah has forbidden that we use drugs unless they're prescribed, or that we take alcohol. Uh, And so we can break those laws, but we do so to our own detriment, not because God will have karma where something else will happen to us, but because these are things that will break us, that will deter us from having true freedom. And this brings us to the next slide, which is one of my favorite quotes since I first became a Baha'i. And it has to do with what is really meant by the fear of God, in my opinion. And that is that what we are really fearing is not God's retribution, but that we may, through foolishness or through being overwhelmed by some addictive substance or some unfortunate pattern of behavior on our part, hurt our own lives, hurt ourselves. And this is a statement of Baha'u'llah from the Gleanings that says true liberty, and by that he means actual liberty as opposed to the guise of liberty, the guise of liberty being I can do whatever I want. Whatever makes me feel good is okay. This is the concept of liberty that abounds in current society. But he says, true liberty consisteth in man's submission to my commandments, little as ye know. And that little as ye know, he uses a lot, and it's very powerful. It means if you only understood. Were men to observe that which we have sent down unto them from the heaven of revelation, they would of a certainty attain unto perfect liberty. Happy is the man that hath apprehended, the purpose of God in whatever he hath revealed from the heaven of his will, that pervadeth all created things. Say, that liberty that profiteth you is to be found nowhere except in complete servitude unto God, the eternal truth. Whoso hath tasted of its sweetness will refuse to barter it for all the dominion of earth and heaven. And of course, again, just to repeat it bears repeating as often as you can think about this, and that is you are helping yourself. God does not need our obedience. God is autonomous and self-sufficient. That he is defying those laws that create a framework that is the most felicitous you can become, even if it doesn't seem like it. Uh, since the fast is coming up upon us, we could talk about that at length. Why does God cause us to test ourselves or test us with having us deprive ourselves in such a fashion? This is a story you're all familiar with, I suspect, most of you, but maybe you haven't read it recently. It's the allegory of the loved and the barred passages in the seven valleys. In particular, it's the valley of knowledge. And you would think it would be the valley of love because it's about a lover seeking his beloved. But you'll see at the end of this why it's in the valley of knowledge. So we're going to read the little anecdote or allegory that's in the valley of knowledge, the third valley. There was once a lover who had sighed for long years in separation from his beloved and wasted in the fire of remoteness. From the rule of love, his heart was empty of patience and his body weary of his spirit. He reckoned life without her as a mockery, and time consumed him away. How many a day he found no rest and longing for her. How many a night the pain of her kept him from sleep. His body was worn to a sigh. His heart's wound had turned him into a cry of sorrow. He had given 1,000 lives for one taste of the cup of her presence, but it availed him not. The doctors knew no cure for him, and companions avoided his company. Yea, physicians have no medicine for one sick of love, unless the favor of the beloved one deliver him. At last the tree of his longing yielded the fruit of despair, and the fire of his hope fell to ashes. Then one night he could live no more, and he went out of his house and made for the marketplace. On a sudden a watchman followed him. He broke into a run, with the watchman following. Then other watchmen came together and barred every passage. I've highlighted that for reasons that will become apparent to the weary one. And the wretched one cried from his heart and ran here and there and moaned to himself, surely this watchman is Israel, my angel of death, following so fast upon me. Or he is a tyrant of men, seeking to harm me. His feet carried him on, the one bleeding with the arrow of love, and his heart lamented. Then he came to a garden wall, and with untold pain he scaled it, for it proved very high. And forgetting his life, he threw himself down into the garden. And there he beheld his beloved with a lamp in her hand, searching for a ring she had lost. When the heart-surrendered lover looked on his ravishing love, he drew a great breath and raised up his hands in prayer, crying, O God, give thou glory to the watchman, and riches and long life. For the watchman was Gabriel, guiding this poor one, or he was Israfil, bringing life to this wretched one. Indeed, his words were true, for he had found many a secret justice in the seeming tyranny of the watchman. Now you see where I'm going, I hope, that what seemed to be tyranny was actually the best way to lead him to his to the object of his search, in the same way that the laws of God are the outline for us, the best path for us to follow to achieve our victory. And seen how many a mercy laid hid behind the veil. Out of wrath the guard had led him who was athirst in love's desert to the sea of his loved one, and lit up the dark night of absence with the light of reunion. He had driven one who was afar into the garden of nearness, had guided an ailing soul to the heart's physician. Now this is the conclusion, and this is the, if you will, the moral of the story. Now, if the lover could have looked ahead, he would have blessed the watchman at the start and prayed on his behalf, and he would have seen that tyranny as justice. But since the end was veiled to him, he moaned and made his plaint in the beginning. Yet those who journey in the garden land of knowledge, because they see the end in the beginning, see peace in war and friendliness in anger. Now, I won't try to explicate that last phrase. It's complicated and it's worth a class into itself. But the point is that true knowledge is understanding that the end result of your arduous journey in following the laws of Baha'u'llah, even though sometimes they may seem strict, even so sometimes they may uh, um, cause you difficulty, as with the fast, and a hundred other things that may, each law will test someone in a different way. Uh, but the reason I had highlighted the meaning of this as the barred passages is those, in my opinion, are an allegory or a symbol of the laws that prevent you from going this way or that way. No, you follow the right path, the straight path, instead of diverting yourself with uh, pathways that will lead you away from your true objective. And if you knew in the end that your true objective was over the wall, which is sort of like a leap of faith, then you would not be afraid at all. You would run all the faster. So that's the end of that allegory, but it's a very good one about why we should not, why we should fear God in the sense of fear that we may fall short of abiding by his laws and thereby injure ourselves, if not in this life, then in the life to come. And even though we are sure that in the life to come there will be forgiveness accessible to us if we call for it, we still would rather have the true path so that we don't have to go through such an experience, but will simply continue to ascend. Now, psychologists' problem with religion, there are many problems that psychologists have with religion, but one of them is that, uh, or I would say almost the most important one, is that religion causes guilt. And if you're feeling guilty, then it might cause you to be depressed and so on. And the psychologists, you shouldn't feel like you're constrained by all of this code of law. You should feel free to do what you think you would enjoy doing. I'm not saying all psychologists have no moral compass or have no idea of, each psychologist will be uh, exhorted to or feel compelled to express his or her own view of what brings success in life. But to find one, you could almost say that for a Baha'i, uh, some psychologists who aren't Baha'is might be pretty good, but they're not going to understand the context in which you are traveling this path. So I've broken it down to a couple of axioms related to this. Religion establishes a moral code you must follow. Often that code forbids actions that are impossibly rigid or else most certain to be abused. And this is something the Catholic Church did early in its origins, where you were basically the only way you could get absolution was through the priest giving you some penance to perform. Baha'u'llah abolished that process and said the only way you can get redemption is through your relationship with God. And he even has a specific prayer that you can pray to attain that forgiveness. When you violate the code, you feel guilt. Your own recourse with most religions is to seek forgiveness from the institution. You then become dependent on the institution or a particular authority figure within the religion. To avoid this dependency relationship, the psychologist may recommend you abandon the religion or else ignore its resolution for the guilt you feel. And this will true. Of course, in today's world, this is even more true than it was when I first became a Baha'i 60 years ago, because society now has abandoned all the constraints that were at least expected if they weren't followed regarding uh, sexuality, regarding alcohol, drugs, and so forth. So what is the solution for guilt? Well, guilt can be a negative thing. It's not always a good thing. It's good when it's based on something that's really happening. It's bad when it is a baseless, when it is a emotional malady. Um, so, what can you do to change uh, the guilt or get rid of the guilt? You can either do one of two things. You can change your actions to accord with the expectations you have established for yourself or that you have allowed someone else to establish for you. So if you're a Baha'i and you feel guilty because of some law you are breaking, uh, if you don't have the fear of God, you may still feel guilty about doing this. And so you can get rid of the guilt by saying, okay, I will do my obligatory prayers, or I will do the fast, or I will follow the laws and ordinances of Baha'u'llah, however difficult they may be for me. The second thing you can do, and that is if you have expectations beyond your ability to conform to them, and I'm not talking about Baha'i laws here because there are all kinds of um, ways out of abiding by a law that Baha'u'llah gives you if you are unable. So, for example, you don't have to do the fast if you're over 70 or over. Um, so I don't have to do the fast because I'm over 70. Or if you are ill, you don't do the fast, and so on, for the obligatory prayers and various other actions. There are alternatives. Change your expectations by seeking another source of feedback, another source of authority, or else change entirely the code. And I've said the mezan because the code is the balance against which you judge your actions, by which you assess how you're doing. So you can do one of two things: change your actions, bring them up to the standard that you're trying to fulfill, or you can change the standard itself by deciding that uh, I don't agree, after examination, I don't agree with what this religion or what this person I'm following is asking of me. It's irrational, it makes no sense, and so forth. And of course, people who become Baha'is may be challenged with what they perceive to be uh, the lack of readily apparent logic until they see that these are really borrowing passages uh, to you on your journey, your life's journey. The analogy of the body and pain. Now, this is a useful analogy. I use it a lot with when I used to teach youth. There's a guy in pain. Now, there's one of two things he can do with this pain, and that is there is a value to negative feedback. It tells you something is wrong. And so guilt will tell you something is wrong. There's a conflict between you and your expectations of yourself or expectations that have been imposed on you. And so you can do one of the two things I've just suggested. Or it could be that there's something wrong with the communication. And that is if you have, for example, some affective disorder, some psychological malady, it could be that the guilt is baseless and that you need either some counseling or some medication to deal with the problem. So this guy seems pretty legitimately in pain. Uh, he's grabbing his knee, but what if uh, there's nothing when he goes to the doctor, there's nothing wrong with his knee and it goes away, but it keeps coming back. It could be there's something wrong with the transmission of communication, that the nerve is damaged, which is not the source of the pain. Is the nerve is supposed to give your body and your brain the feedback that take a look at this, something's wrong. But if the nerve is injured, it'll tell you something's wrong, even when something's not wrong, except the nerve itself. And so this is true also, as I say, the analogy there is if we feel guilt and there's no basis for it, other than just an emotional affective disorder, then we have to deal with the improper information we're getting. So, solution to the knee pain: take lots of oxycodone so you don't feel the pain. Get a steroid injection so you can continue to be active or finish the game. My own experience with my coach, that's referring to the fact that I had two very serious injuries playing football in high school. One tore my shoulder up so that I tore my rotator cuff, which I had to have 3 surgeries for that, and still screwed up. And the other was when uh, I was tackling someone and someone was helping me tackle someone, and their finger went into my eye. And so the coach came over to me as I was wallowing on the ground in pain, and he jokingly said, "How many fingers am I holding up?" And I said, "4." And he said, "You're okay, get up and play." Well, what had happened is my retina had become detached. They didn't find out until the day before I was to go into a big game, and so for the next 3 weeks, I had to lie on my back while they attached my retina back. At first, I had to lie. And back then, there weren't any laser treatments. So, at any rate, if I had played in that game, I would have lost vision in my eye. You get to an orthopedist to do x-rays or do an MRI to determine what is causing the pain, follow the doctor's guidance, stay off the knee, have the knee surgically repaired. And of course, that's what Baha'u'llah says, that the solution when you are sick is find the best physician you can. And of course, there was a wonderful physician who was not a Baha'i, who helped Baha'u'llah when he was poisoned by Mirza Yahya. And his result of that poisoning, of course, his hand trembled the rest of his life. There's another whole nother story there that's very interesting. The doctor gave his life for Baha'u'llah, and that's another anecdote, but it has nothing to do with this, so we'll go on. So, dealing with guilt. Big deal in our society today, because everyone is trying to make you feel guilty about something, whether it's a moral code or you're not fitting in or you're not doing what your friends want you to do and so on. So it's an important thing, and it's an important thing that as Baha'is, we have the tools to know how to deal with guilt, and that we have the framework for the pathway that the lover traversed in finding his beloved. Guilt, like pain, is communication, and this is just sort of a recitation of the axioms that I just noted. The pain is nature's way of letting you know how you're doing. The message is valuable even if it is wrong. Guilt is your conscience's way of letting you know how you're doing. The message is valuable even if it's wrong. The worst response to either is to ignore the communication. Solution is discover the source of your guilt. Prayer for forgiveness is violating law, and of course, stop doing what is the violation. Turn to the LSA if in need of guidance or assistance, or simply prayers to help you deal with this. If you're an alcoholic, and many Baha'is have had to deal with that, and go to the LSA and ask for assistance. Determine if the guilt is needless, in which case you change your expectations and so forth. In the context of a society without a shared moral compass, moral or spiritual laws seem dated, puritanical, and even detrimental to your success. It should be your success, to you, your success, and your reputation. In the early days of the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i laws seemed radically liberal. I remember this very well. I gave a fireside one time, and the people were very liberal-minded. Now, this was in 1960 or 59. And we believe in racial equality, interracial marriage, and so forth, and a world commonwealth. And and the guy said, you Baha'is are more liberal than I am. And so we were perceived as liberal. In these days, the faith seems puritanical and oppressive to some because one is not supposed to have laws, or if they have laws, they choose whatever laws they want. No alcohol, no sex outside the bounds of marriage between a man and a woman, fasting, no hunting unless necessary for survival, no weapons unless necessary for occupation, written permission from parents for marriage, no participation in partisan politics, obligatory prayers, and on and on and on. There are many we could cite that would and you think, well, well, this is not a problem for anyone. You never know what's going to be a problem when you're introducing the faith to someone. Uh, it may be the least important thing to you, but it may be just something to them that's, well, that's a non-starter. I'm not interested. I remember one time a very learned professor at my university. Uh, I respected him about as much as anyone I knew. And so he was learning about the faith, and I was telling him, and he would ask more questions, and I would tell him more, and so on. Well, this happened to be at a party, and I didn't notice whether he was drinking alcohol or not. But he said, "What are the laws and so on?" Well, uh, at a party is not the time to say one of the principles of Baha'i faith is we don't imbibe alcoholic beverage. But I was young, and so I said that, and he said, "Well, that's enough for me," and he wouldn't hear another word. That was it. Um, his mizan was out of whack, obviously, but so you never know. Some of the ways Baha'u'llah has liberated us from restrictive religious laws, and of course, uh, you may not understand some of them in the Agdas, where he has abolished uh, former laws or some of the things about what you can wear, what you can touch, and so on. Uh, and they're leftovers from prior religions, laws from prior religions. Uh, no confession, no restrictions on apparel or cut of beard or hair. Each one of these, the first one relates to the Christian religion, the second one to the Islamic religion. No priesthood or other figures of authority that relates to the Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. No rituals or sacraments. That's mostly Judaism and Christianity, though you do have some rituals in Islam, and you do have congregational prayer. But Muhammad was very careful to get rid of the iconography, the statues and so forth, saints, idea of saints and so on. No congregational prayer, the equality of women and men, house of worship for people of all faiths. So in other words, you don't have to be a member, nor will you have to be exposed to someone preaching at you. There is no sermoning or sermonizing that takes place in the house of worship. It is simply a house of worship and no sermons. Self-assessment. Baha'u'llah gives us several occasions the tools for seeing how we're doing so that guilt doesn't come upon us unexpectedly. O son of being, bring thyself to account each day ere thou art summoned to a reckoning, for death unheralded shall come upon thee, and thou shalt be called to give account for thy deeds. Now, this is a daily accounting that we're supposed to do. Of course, we can have other periods where we do this. Certainly, the time of fasting, this is one of the great bounties of fasting, as you realize you're hungry or thirsty, and it causes you to be constantly aware of, I'm not doing this because I believe. So you're being tested almost all day long. And and it takes you into account. How much do I believe? How much, since no one will know if I have something to eat or if I take a sip of water. I'm only accountable to myself and God. Um, the last part of this is also important because it talks about the fact that, as Baha'u'llah says in Gleanings, one of the first things that happened to us, and we talked about this in the Q&A last week when we talked about NDEs, or near-death experiences. One of the first things that happens to us when we pass to the next stage of our life is that we will be called to review our lives and see how we've assess how we've done, what we've done well, what we've done poorly. Will be called into accounting. So we should do the same thing ourselves each day. And of course, the idea is each day should be a little better than the previous day if you do this correctly. Response to self-assessment. So what do you do once you assess yourself and you say, well, I got this problem, this problem, this problem? Well, this is just my ideas, and so they're not from the writings. Be kind to yourself, even as you would be to another. We are told to forgive other people, uh, certainly, but we should be forgiving with ourselves. We should be kind to ourselves. We should not, one thing we can do as Baha'is, especially as new Baha'is, is we can expect too much of ourselves because there's so much to do. There's so many activities that we are challenged to do, both on just the personal regimen, daily regimen as Baha'is, but also in the core activities and everything else. It's enough to keep you alert every day into whether or not you're doing enough. But you have to avoid exhorting yourself to do more than is healthy. Avoid attempting some sudden, radical, and impossible declaration of reformation. Again, these are just my own insights from my own experience, and that is, you say, okay, I did this, I'm never going to do that again. Uh, Usually transformation takes place by stages and degrees. Certainly that's true of the progressive revelation. So we should do the same with our own progression, in my opinion. Some things, obviously, like drinking or doing drugs or whatever, we can make such a proclamation or declaration and follow it possibly. But insofar as uh, you know, we have to be careful about saying, well, I'm never going to do that again, because then the next time you do it, you feel more guilty. And to what's going to eventually happen if you do that to yourself is you're going to stop trying, or you're going to back away from the faith. I've seen many, many occasions where a believer, particularly a new believer, will try to do everything at once, and it's overwhelming, and they will leave. They will run away. It's too much. Realize that progress must be achieved incrementally. Remember, the source of solace is the revealed word. Measure your actions against the guidance for this day and this plan. But do we possess any free will? Now, this is a worthy of a whole nother class, and I've thought about doing one, and maybe I will in the future. Uh, if you ask someone, do you have free will? One exercise I used to do, excuse me, in a fireside on this subject is challenge someone to name any action they have taken that was completely the result of their own free choice. And you can't really do it. You can do it satisfactorily for yourself, but you can't defend it. Someone can say, well, you did this because it was expected of you. You did this, you made this choice because of your upbringing, because someone influenced you on. It's almost impossible to prove that you've done something with complete free will. And yet it is a crucial axiom of the Baha'i faith that in creation, God has created us in his image, and that means with free will. Uh, Otherwise, obedience to the commandments and the pathway that God has laid out for us would not have any value. that this is, of course, why you can't inherit the faith, why each person has to declare their own belief once they achieve the age of 15. Uh, you can't just assume that someone is a Baha'i, though I made the unfortunate mistake with one of my children of saying that when she found out that she had to declare she was a Baha'i, and she said, "But I am a Baha'i. I've been a Baha'i all my life." And so she didn't want to sign the declaration card or anything because it offended her. Later, she changed her mind and declared, but it was years later. So, at any rate, what choices brought you to where you are right now? And so, in anything you're doing has behind it or surrounding it a whole panoply of choices that you have made. And some of them are based on influences outside yourself or influences that you have subjected yourself to or allowed yourself to be coerced and so forth or influenced. I love this. I'm being sarcastic. This phrase that is used on the internet now about influencers. What an abominable concept. Uh, if it were dealing with something like moral codes or something, but influencers about makeup and so forth, that you're trying to uh, shape the way people think about something. And it works, unfortunately. Not your race brought you to where you are. You didn't choose that. Not your beauty or physique. Not your parents' status or wealth. These are all things outside of what made you become where you are right now. Not country or city you were born in, not your genetic predispositions, not your basic intelligence, not all the life-changing events you have encountered, which were totally beyond your control. So where you are and what you are and so on, a great deal of it is beyond your control. So what is within our free will? Well, Abdu'l-Baha says in this passage from Some Answered Questions, some things are subject to the free will of man, such as justice, equity, tyranny, and injustice. In other words, good and evil actions. It is evident and clear that these actions are, for the most part, left to the will of man. But there are certain things to which man is forced and compelled, such as sleep, death, sickness, decline of power, injuries, and misfortunes. These are not subject to the will of man, and he is not responsible for them, for he is compelled to endure them. But in the choice of good and bad actions, he is free, and he commits them according to his own will. Man's physical existence on this earth is a period during which the moral exercise of his free will, now this is from the House of Justice, is tried and tested in order to prepare his soul for the other worlds of God. And we must welcome affliction and tribulations as opportunities for improvement in our eternal self. Now that's very important. That in other places, Abdu'l-Baha says, without such afflictions, without tribulations, without testing, we do not progress.